Tonight, we will drift together, slowly and gently, into one of the oldest and most beautiful mysteries the world has ever told. The story of Atlantis, the great island city that rose in splendor from the sea and sank in a single day and night beneath the waves. This is a long and unhurried tale, and you do not need to hold on to any of it. Let it move over you like the slow swell of a calm ocean, rising and falling, and let your body grow heavier and your breathing slower with every passing word. There is nowhere you need to be tonight, and nothing you need to remember. And if you find some comfort in these long, quiet journeys, you are warmly welcome to follow along or to subscribe, and to leave a gentle like before you drift away, so that these stories can keep finding the people who need them, night after night. There is no rush in it, and nothing is asked of you now but to rest. So settle in, make yourself comfortable, and let us sail out, together, onto the wide and patient sea, toward a city that the world has never quite forgotten. The story of Atlantis, as we know it, comes down to us from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who wrote of it more than 2,000 years ago. He told that the tale was far older still, passed down through many generations, carried long ago from the priests of Egypt to a wise Greek traveler, and handed down at last to Plato himself. Whether it was history or a fable, or something gently woven of both, no one can now say for certain. But the story he told has never left us, and tonight we will follow it slowly, from its shining beginning to its quiet end. In the very beginning, the old account says, when the gods divided the whole of the world among themselves, each taking a portion to watch over and to love, one great island in the far western ocean fell to Poseidon, the god of the sea. It was a broad and fertile land, larger, it was said, than whole nations put together, ringed by the endless ocean and blessed with a gentle climate, rich soil, and every good thing that the earth could offer. And Poseidon, looking upon this fair island, came to love it deeply and made it his own. Upon that island, in those earliest days, there lived a young woman named Plato, and Poseidon came to love her, to keep her safe, and to make for her a home like no other. The god shaped the very land around the hill where she dwelt. With the ease of a god, he drew rings of water and rings of land, one inside the other, circling the central hill like ripples frozen upon a pond, so that no one could reach her without his leave. 2 rings of land and 3 of water, perfectly round, one within the next, enclosing the heart of what would one day become the great city. And there, at the very center of those rings, upon the low green hill, the line of Atlantis began. Poseidon and Plato had children, and their children had children, and so a great royal family grew and flourished upon the island, generation after generation, for a very long age. The eldest of that first generation, the firstborn son who would rule over all the rest, was given the whole island as his kingdom, and his name was Atlas. And it was from him, the old story says, that both the island and the great ocean around it took their names, Atlantis and the Atlantic. The island was divided among Atlas and his brothers, 10 kings in all, each given a region to rule as his own, and yet all of them bowed to the high king of the central city, the line of Atlas. And so Atlantis was, from its very beginning, both one kingdom and many, a confederation of kings, bound together by blood and by ancient law, ruling in peace over a land of extraordinary richness. For long ages they governed wisely and gently, and the island prospered as few places ever have, in all the long story of the world. Let us picture the island itself slowly, as it was in those days of its glory. Imagine a vast and gentle land, green and golden, with a great plain stretching across its heart, sheltered by tall mountains to the north that broke the cold winds and held the rain. The mountains, the old account says, were themselves famous for their beauty and their number, full of villages and rivers and meadows, and rich with every kind of creature. And from those mountains, countless streams ran down to feed the plain below, so that the whole island was green and living and well watered all year long. At the very center of it all rose the city, built upon and around those ancient rings of land and water that Poseidon had shaped. Over the long generations, the kings had built upon their inheritance, bridging the rings, tunneling through the land, lining the canals with stone, until the whole was joined into one great and shining city, unlike anything the world had seen before or since. Let us move through it now, gently, ring by ring, from its outer edge to its golden heart, the way you might wander through a beautiful dream, in no hurry at all to reach its end. Around the whole of the city, far out upon the plain, ran a vast circular canal, and beyond it a great wall enclosing everything within. From the outer sea, a broad channel had been cut inland, wide and deep enough for the largest ships, running all the way to the outermost ring of water, so that vessels could sail directly from the ocean into the very body of the city. And along that channel, and around each ring, there were harbors and docks, always full of ships and sailors and merchants, come from every corner of the known world to trade in the wealth of Atlantis. The rings of water were crossed by great bridges, wide enough for chariots, and where the bridges met the rings of land, the kings had cut passages through, roofed over, so that ships could pass beneath the land from one ring of water to the next, sailing through tunnels of stone into hidden inner harbors. Towers and gates stood guard at every crossing, and the walls that ringed the city were themselves a wonder, for they were covered, the old account says, in shining metal, the outer wall in gleaming bronze, the next in bright tin, and the innermost in a red-gold metal called Orichalcum, which glittered like fire in the sun. Let us pause there a moment on that word, Orichalcum. It was a metal, the old story says, that was found only in Atlantis, mined from the earth of the island, and prized second only to gold itself. It shone with a warm reddish light, like living fire caught in solid form, and the Atlanteans used it to sheathe their walls, and their temples, and their most precious things. To sail toward the city from the sea in the low golden light of evening would have been to see it glowing softly upon the water, ring within ring, a city that seemed to burn gently without being consumed. Crossing inward, over the bridges and through the rings, a traveler would come at last to the innermost ring of land, the heart of the old city, and there, upon the central island, stood the grandest wonders of all. This central island was itself ringed by a wall of stone and sheathed all around in Orichalcum, so that it glowed. And within it lay the royal palace, built up and adorned by king after king, each one adding to the beauty his fathers had left him, until it had grown into something almost beyond belief, a palace whose splendor amazed all who were permitted to look upon it. And at the very center of the central island, at the true heart of Atlantis, stood the most sacred place of all, the Temple of Poseidon, the god who had founded the city and fathered its kings. It was a great temple, long and broad, and something about its proportions seemed strange and a little foreign to later eyes. Its outer walls were covered entirely in silver, and its high pinnacles in gold, so that it shone from far away. And within, the ceiling was of gleaming ivory, worked all over with gold and silver and orichalcum, and every wall and pillar was covered with the same red gold shining metal. Inside the temple stood a statue of the god himself, so tall that its head nearly touched the roof. Poseidon, standing in a chariot, driving 6 winged horses, surrounded by 100 sea nymphs riding upon dolphins. It was all of gold, and it filled the great space with a soft and solemn light. Around it stood the golden statues of the 10 first kings and their queens, and countless offerings besides, given by the kings and the people over the long generations, until the temple held within it a treasure beyond all reckoning. And here, in this shining and sacred place, the kings of Atlantis came together to worship and to rule. Nearby, upon the central island, there rose 2 springs, one of cold water and one of warm, gifts, the old story says, from the god himself. And these springs flowed endlessly, sweet and pure and plentiful, and the Atlanteans led their waters everywhere, into fountains and gardens, into pools open to the sky, and into great roofed bathing halls, some for the kings, some for ordinary people, some even for the horses and the animals. Everywhere upon that island, there was the soft and constant sound of running water, warm and cold, flowing gently through the heart of the city, day and night, without ever ceasing. The waters that flowed away from the springs and the baths were not wasted, but led out to nourish a sacred grove of tall and beautiful trees, watered by the rich overflow, and then carried by aqueducts across the bridges to the outer rings, where they fed gardens and greenery all through the city. For the Atlanteans, in their long age of wisdom, had learned to work gently with the land and the water, so that nothing was wasted, and the whole city was green and living and cool, even at its busy heart, a place of gardens and fountains and quiet shaded walks. Upon the rings of land between the waters, the Atlanteans built all the life of a great city. There were temples to many gods, and gardens, and open grounds for exercise, and race courses for horses that ran the whole way around the great outer ring. There were barracks for guards, and dwellings, and workshops, and markets. And everywhere there was movement and life, the passing of ships through the rings, the crossing of chariots over the bridges, the sound of trade and craft and music drifting out over the water, all of it turning gently around that shining, sacred heart. Beyond the city, the great plain stretched out across the south of the island, sheltered by the mountains, and it too was a wonder of patient work. Over long ages, the account says, the Atlanteans had shaped it, digging a vast network of straight canals across the whole plain, gathering the waters that ran down from the mountains, carrying them to the fields, and draining at last to the sea. And so the plain was rich beyond measure, giving 2 harvests each year, watered by the rains in winter and by the canals in summer, feeding the whole of the great island with ease. And the island gave up its riches gladly. There were metals of every kind, dug from the earth, and Orichalcum most precious of all. There were forests that gave timber for building and for ships. There were pastures for every kind of animal, tame and wild, and even the old story says, great herds of elephants, for the island was large enough and rich enough to feed even them. There were fruits, and grains, and fragrant herbs, and flowers, and every good thing that grows from the soil, given freely and in abundance, so that the people of Atlantis wanted for nothing at all. And so, for a very long age, Atlantis flourished, rich and beautiful and at peace, ruled by wise kings descended from a god, blessed with every good thing, its shining city turning gently at the center of a green and golden land, ringed by the wide and patient sea. It must have seemed to those who lived there that such a place could never end, that the gentle turning of its days would go on forever. Hold that image with you now, softly as you rest. The glowing city upon the water, at the height of its long and golden peace. For that is where we will linger a while before the tale turns. The 10 kings of Atlantis, each in his own region, ruled with great power, holding the lives and the laws of their people in their hands. And yet they were bound, all of them, by an ancient and sacred order handed down from Poseidon himself, and inscribed, the old account says, upon a great pillar of Orichalcum that stood within the temple at the center of the island. Upon that pillar were written the laws by which the kings must live, and the solemn oaths that bound them to one another, and the punishments for any who should break them. And to that pillar, from time to time, the 10 kings came together. Every 5th year, and then every 6th, turning in gentle alternation so that both the even and the odd were honored, the 10 kings would gather at the Temple of Poseidon to take counsel together and to sit in judgment and to renew their sacred vows. And before they could pass any judgment upon one another, they first performed an ancient and solemn rite, the same rite their fathers had performed before them, back through all the long generations to the very founding of the city. It is a strange and beautiful ceremony, and worth our while to move through it slowly tonight. In the sacred grove of Poseidon, there roamed bulls running free. And on the night of their gathering, the 10 kings, alone, without any weapon of iron, carrying only staves of wood and nooses, would hunt among the bulls, praying to the god that they might capture the one that was pleasing to him. And when at last a bull was taken, they would lead it to the great pillar of Orichalcum. And there, over the sacred writing of the law, the bull was offered to the god in the old and solemn way. Then, filling a great bowl, the kings would mix in an offering for each of them, and pour libations over the fire, and swear, upon the sacred law inscribed on the pillar, that they would judge according to those laws, and punish any who had broken them, and never themselves transgress. Each king, drinking from the bowl in turn, dedicated himself to the oath, and then hung his cup of purest gold within the temple as an offering. And when the sacred feast was done, and darkness had fallen, they would put on robes of deep and beautiful blue, and sit together through the night among the embers of the offering. And there in the quiet of the night, robed in blue, the 10 kings gave and received judgment, settling any dispute that had arisen among them, deciding together the great matters of the realm. And when the dawn came, they wrote down the judgments they had given upon a tablet of gold, and dedicated it with their robes as a memorial within the temple. In this way, for age upon age, the kings of Atlantis ruled themselves, bound by sacred law, gathered in solemn council, judging with care, and holding always to the ancient oaths of their fathers. There were many other laws besides, concerning the honors and the duties of each king, and the ways in which they should aid one another, especially in war. No king was permitted to make war upon another, and if any city on the island rose against the royal line, all the others were bound to come to its defense. And the greatest matters, of war and of peace, were always decided together, in common council, with the leadership held always by the royal house of Atlas, the descendants of the firstborn son, who could not be condemned to death unless a majority of the 10 kings agreed. For a very long age, this order held, and it held because the people who kept it were, the old account says, truly good. For many generations, the blood of the god ran strong in them, and they bore their great wealth and their great power lightly, with wisdom and with gentleness. They did not become drunk on their riches, nor proud of their strength. They saw clearly that all these good things grow only out of friendship joined with virtue, and that if a person chases wealth and honor for their own sake, both the wealth and the virtue slip away together. And so, holding this wisdom in their hearts, the Atlanteans of the Golden Age were gentle and just. They thought little of their gold and their possessions, treating them almost as a light burden rather than a treasure. They were not made careless by their luxury, nor did their wealth master them. Instead, sober and clear-eyed, they saw that all these outward things flourish best when held gently in a spirit of mutual kindness, and by valuing virtue above all, and holding their riches lightly, they kept both for a long and shining age. The power of Atlantis in that golden time spread far beyond the shores of its own island. Its kings ruled not only their own broad land, but many other islands across the ocean and parts of the great continent beyond, and even, the old account says, lands within the inner sea as far as the borders of Egypt and the lands of the Mediterranean. It was a vast dominion, gathered not, in those early days, by cruelty, but by the natural greatness of a people blessed above all others, whose ships sailed everywhere, and whose wealth and wisdom were the wonder of the world. Let us imagine, for a gentle moment, the harbors of Atlantis in those days. The account tells of docks and quays crowded with ships from every land, and merchants arriving day and night, so many that the harbors were filled with the sound of their voices and their trade, a great and constant murmur that carried on through the night. Ships came laden with goods from distant shores, and left again heavy with the riches of the island. It was, perhaps, the busiest and wealthiest place in all the world, and yet at its heart it remained calm and ordered and secure. The Atlanteans could raise, when they wished, a great host for war, though in their golden age they had little need of it. The old account numbers their forces almost beyond belief. Thousands of war chariots and horsemen and archers and slingers, and vast companies of foot soldiers, drawn from across the whole island and its many regions. And upon the sea, their true strength, they could launch a fleet of 1,200 ships, filling the harbors and the channel and the outer sea with their sails. It was a power that no other nation could hope to match, and for a long age it kept the island safe and untroubled. And yet, for all this might, the deepest strength of Atlantis in its best days was not its fleet, nor its armies, nor its walls of shining metal. It was the character of its people, their fairness, their gentleness, their reverence for the God who had founded them, and their wisdom in holding lightly to the things of the world. As long as that inner strength remained, no outer force could truly threaten them. The city glowed upon the water not only with Orichalcum, but with something quieter and finer. The calm confidence of a people at peace with themselves and with the gods. Picture, then, an ordinary evening in the great city at the height of its glory. The sun sinking low over the western ocean, gilding the rings of water, setting the walls of bronze and tin and orichalcum aglow. The soft sound of the warm and cold springs flowing endlessly through the gardens. Ships drawing quietly into harbor, their day's work done. The scent of fruit trees and flowers drifting on the sea air. And over it all, the Temple of Poseidon, silver and gold, shining softly against the darkening sky, at the calm and sacred center of the world. In those days, the account suggests, the people lived long and gentle lives, in a land that gave them everything they needed with ease. There was time for craft, and for music, and for the raising of beautiful buildings, and for the quiet cultivation of the mind and the spirit. Generation followed generation, each inheriting the beauty its fathers had made, and adding, in its turn, some new beauty of its own. And so the city grew ever more splendid, not through greed or haste, but through the patient love of many hands, over many peaceful years. Let us wander for a while through the gentler details of that golden life, the small and human things the old account only hints at, and which we may imagine softly for ourselves. Picture the markets of Atlantis in the cool of the morning, spread along the rings of land, where goods from every corner of the world were laid out in the shade. Fruits and spices from distant shores, cloth dyed in deep sea colors, worked metal and carved wood and fine pottery, and everywhere the soft murmur of voices, buying and selling and greeting one another, beneath the gentle sound of the ever-flowing fountains. Picture the craftsmen at their patient work, the smiths who worked the red gold orichalcum, coaxing it into shining sheets and delicate ornaments, the shipwrights in the harbors, shaping the great vessels that carried Atlantis across the world, the stone carvers and the builders, adding, year by year, some new beauty to the palace and the temples. Theirs was not the hurried labor of a grasping people, but the slow and loving craft of those who had time and skill and the deep satisfaction of making beautiful things well, to last for many generations. Picture the music of the city drifting out over the water in the long evenings, the sound of strings and gentle pipes, of voices raised softly in the old songs, songs of the sea, and of the god who had founded them, and of the long line of kings. The Atlanteans loved beauty in all its forms, and filled their days with it, with music, and with poetry, and with dance, and with the quiet contemplation of the stars, which their wise ones studied from the heights of the central island, tracing the slow turning of the heavens through the clear ocean nights. For they were, in their golden age, a thoughtful people as well as a wealthy one. In the shade of their gardens and the calm of their temples, they turned their minds to the deep questions, to the movements of the stars and the nature of the gods and the right way for a person and a city to live. Their priests kept the ancient knowledge, and their wise ones added to it, and the young were taught, gently, to love wisdom and virtue above riches and display. It was this, more than all their gold, that made them, for so long, truly great. Picture, too, the ordinary joys of an Atlantean day. The warm baths, fed by the gods' own springs, where people gathered to rest and to talk. The gardens, heavy with fruit, where children played beside the pools. The great racecourse, where fine horses ran in the morning light, and the people gathered to watch and to cheer. The quiet shaded walks along the rings of water, where an old couple might stroll together in the cool of the evening, looking out over the shining city they had known all their lives, and would leave in time to their children's children. And picture the ships, always the ships, for Atlantis was above all a people of the sea. Watch them setting out at dawn through the great channel, their sails filling with the morning wind, bound for distant shores. Watch them returning at dusk, low in the water with the wealth of the world, gliding home through the rings and into the sheltered inner harbors. The whole life of the city breathed with the coming and going of ships, like a great heart drawing the world in and sending it out again, tirelessly, across the wide and shining sea. On the days of the great festivals, the whole city would come alive with color and light. The people would put on their finest robes and garland the temples with flowers and gather in the sacred grove and the open squares to honor Poseidon and the gods. There would be processions across the bridges and music and the sharing of food and the telling of the old stories, so that even the youngest child came to know by heart the tale of how the god had shaped the rings of land and water and founded the line of kings in the far-off morning of the world. And at the center of every festival and every ordinary day stood the temple, silver and gold, glowing softly at the heart of the island. To the Atlanteans of the Golden Age, it was more than a building. It was the sign and the center of everything they were, their bond with the god who had made them, the resting place of their sacred law, the still point around which the whole of their bright and busy world turned. As long as they kept faith with what that temple meant, the old story tells us all was well with Atlantis, and for a long, long age they did. So we have seen the city in its glory, from its shining walls to its quiet gardens, from its crowded harbors to its sacred and golden heart. We have seen a people blessed above all others, living long and gentle lives in a land of extraordinary beauty and peace. It is a vision worth holding softly as the tale prepares to turn. The very height of a great civilization, the golden afternoon of Atlantis, all its beauty gathered and shining in the last long age before the light began, so slowly to fade. It is worth resting here, in this long golden afternoon of Atlantis, for the story, like all such stories, will not stay here forever. But for now, let us simply dwell in it, a great and gentle civilization, at the very height of its flourishing, wanting for nothing, at peace with its neighbors and its gods, its shining city turning slowly at the heart of a green and fruitful land. Few peoples in all the long history of the world, whether real or dreamed, have ever risen so high or lived so well as the Atlanteans of the Golden Age. And through all those long generations, the sea lay calm around the island, as if it too were content. The tides rose and fell against the harbor walls. The fishing boats went out at dawn and returned at dusk. The great ocean, which had given the island its name, seemed a faithful friend, cradling Atlantis gently upon its broad back, carrying its ships to every shore, and bringing the wealth of the world home again. No one in those days could have imagined that same sea rising one day in anger to close forever over all of it. For the god of that sea, Poseidon, watched over his island and his descendants with care. His temple stood at its heart. His laws were inscribed upon its sacred pillar. His blood ran in the veins of its kings. As long as the Atlanteans honored him and held to the wisdom he had given them, his favor lay upon the island like sunlight upon calm water. And for a very long age, they did honor him, and so the island prospered. And the story of Atlantis was, for all that time, a story only of beauty and peace and light. Let us take one last slow walk through the Golden City before the shadow falls. Out along the great outer racecourse, where horses ran in the cool of the morning, across the wide bridges over the still and shining rings of water, through the gardens fed by the endless springs, heavy with fruit and flowers, past the busy inner harbors where ships lay at rest, up to the wall of Orichalcum glowing softly red, and in, at last, to the silver and golden temple at the heart of it all, where the great statue of Poseidon stood watch over his beloved city in the deep and peaceful quiet. This was Atlantis at its height, a wonder of the world, a city and a civilization that seemed almost too beautiful to be real, blessed by a god, ruled by wisdom, rich beyond measure, and gentle in its strength. Whether it ever truly stood upon the earth, or whether it lived only in the dreaming of an old philosopher, it has never left the imagination of the world. And perhaps that is because, in its rise and its fall together, it holds up a mirror to something deep and true about ourselves. But now, gently, the long golden afternoon must begin to fade. For no age, however bright, lasts forever, and even the greatest of cities, in the end, must meet its turning. The change, when it came to Atlantis, came slowly at first, so slowly that few would have noticed it, a quiet dimming of something that had once shone so clear. And it began, the old story says, not with any enemy, nor any disaster from without, but with something far quieter and far sadder, a slow change in the hearts of the people themselves. For many generations, the divine portion that Poseidon had passed to his descendants remained strong within them, and it kept them gentle and wise and just. But blood over long ages grows thin. Generation after generation, the divine nature within the Atlanteans was mixed more and more with mortal nature, until at last the gods' gift grew faint within them, and the ordinary human weaknesses, which had slept so long, began quietly to wake. And as the divine faded, the merely human rose, and the long golden age began, very slowly, to lose its light. The change was gradual and at first almost invisible. The city still shone. The harbors were still full. The temples still stood in silver and gold. To the eye, nothing had altered at all. But within the hearts of the people, something had begun to shift. Where once they had held their great wealth lightly, now they began to grip it tightly. Where once they had valued virtue above all, now they began to hunger for gold, and for power, and for the outward show of greatness for its own sake. Little by little, the qualities that had made them truly great slipped away from them. They grew grasping where they had been generous, proud where they had been humble, restless where they had been at peace. They could no longer bear their good fortune with the old calm wisdom. Their riches, which they had once carried so lightly, now began to master them. And though they seemed, to those who could not see clearly, more magnificent than ever, they were in truth growing poorer in the only way that finally matters, poorer in spirit and in goodness. And as their hearts changed, so too did their conduct in the world. The vast power of Atlantis, which had once rested gently upon its neighbors, now began to press down upon them. No longer content with their own broad and blessed land, the Atlanteans turned their eyes outward, hungry for more, and began to use their great fleets and armies not to protect, but to conquer. Nation after nation across the wide sea fell under their growing dominion, and what had been a confederation of gentle kings became, slowly, a grasping and ambitious empire. They swept across the islands of the ocean and the shores of the great inner sea, subjecting the peoples they found there, gathering them under their rule and reaching ever farther toward the ancient lands of the Mediterranean. Their ambition, once held in check by wisdom, now knew no limit. They meant, in the end, to bring the whole of the known world beneath their single rule, to enslave every free people, and to make of all the lands around the inner sea one great dominion, answering to the kings of Atlantis alone. Now, in those distant days, the old account says, there was another city, far away across the sea, small and not yet rich, but ancient and noble. The earliest Athens, the forerunner of the Greek city that Plato knew, standing thousands of years before his own time. This early Athens was everything that Atlantis had once been and had now ceased to be. Brave and just, and gentle and wise, governed by good laws and blessed with citizens of rare courage and virtue. And it fell to this small and noble city to stand against the vast might of Atlantis. As the armies and fleets of Atlantis advanced across the sea, subjecting one land after another, the free peoples of the Mediterranean looked for someone to lead their resistance. And it was Athens who rose to lead them. Athens, small but fearless, who gathered the free nations together and stood at their head against the invader. It must have seemed a hopeless cause, this little city and its allies, standing against the greatest power the world had ever known. And yet they stood. The war that followed was long and hard, and its details are lost to us, for the old account breaks off before it can tell the whole of the tale. But we know its shape. We know that the allies of Athens, one by one, fell away or were defeated or lost their courage in the face of so overwhelming an enemy, until at last Athens stood entirely alone, abandoned by all the rest, facing the full might of Atlantis by herself. And still, even then, she did not yield. Alone against all odds, the early Athenians fought on. Through their courage and their skill and their unbreakable resolve, they held back the vast forces of Atlantis, and then, against all expectation, they began to turn them back. They freed the peoples who had already fallen under the Atlantean yoke, one after another, driving the invaders back across the sea toward their own shining shores. It was, the old story says, one of the noblest deeds in all the long history of the world. A small and virtuous people, standing alone and prevailing over the mightiest empire on the earth. And so the great ambition of Atlantis, to swallow the whole world, was broken, not by a greater empire, but by the courage of the free. The tide of conquest, which had seemed unstoppable, was turned. The enslaved were set free, and the vast dominion that Atlantis had gathered began, in a single generation, to slip from its grasp. It was a defeat, but it was more than a defeat. It was a judgment of a kind upon a people who had forgotten the wisdom that had once made them great and had reached out to take what was not theirs to take. Let us pause here gently and consider what had happened, for it is the quiet heart of the whole tale. Atlantis had not been destroyed by any weakness in its walls, nor any failure of its fleets, nor any enemy greater than itself. It had been undone first and most deeply from within, by the slow fading of its goodness, by the rise of pride and greed where wisdom had once dwelt. The war with Athens was not the true fall of Atlantis. It was only the outward sign of a fall that had already happened, silently, in the hearts of its people, over many long years. For the greatness of Atlantis had never truly rested in its Orichalcum, or its harbors, or its 1,200 ships. It had rested in the character of its people, in their gentleness, and their wisdom, and their reverence for the gods. And once that inner greatness was gone, all the outward magnificence in the world could not save them. The shining city still stood, more splendid than ever to look upon. But the thing that had truly made it Atlantis, the soul of it, had already quietly begun to die. And this, the old philosophers understood, was the deepest lesson of the tale, that no amount of wealth or power or beauty can preserve a people who have lost their virtue, and that the truest strength of any city or any person lies not in what they possess, but in what they are. Atlantis had everything the world could offer, and it was not enough, because they had let go of the one thing that mattered most. It is a sobering thought, and yet a strangely gentle one, told softly in the dark. That goodness, in the end, is the only foundation that truly lasts. Now the gods, who see all things, had watched this slow decline with sorrow. Zeus, the king of the gods, who governs by law and by justice, saw how far the once noble Atlanteans had fallen, saw their pride and their greed and their reaching after dominion over the free. And he saw that they had grown unable to bear their good fortune, that their divine inheritance had faded, and that they had become, for all their splendor, an unworthy and a graceless people, and he resolved that they should be brought at last to judgment, so that they might be corrected and chastened and made to remember. The old account tells us that Zeus gathered all the gods together into their most sacred dwelling place, at the very center of the whole universe, from which they could look out upon all that had come to be. And there, before them all, he began to speak, to pronounce his judgment upon the fallen city of Atlantis. And at that very moment, the old story of Plato breaks off, unfinished, in the middle of a sentence, as if the philosopher had laid down his pen and never taken it up again. What Zeus said, we are never told. And so, at the story's most solemn moment, a great silence falls, and we are left to imagine the rest. But we know from the older telling what came to pass. We know that the judgment of the gods fell upon Atlantis, and that it fell not slowly as its corruption had come, but all at once, with a suddenness that no one could have foreseen. The long, slow fading of its soul was answered, at the last, by a swift and total ending, an ending that would pass into the memory of the whole world and never leave it again. For a time, perhaps, life in the great city went on as before. The sun still rose over the eastern sea and set over the western ocean. The springs still flowed, warm and cold, through the gardens. The ships still came and went from the crowded harbors. The people, grown proud and forgetful, went about their days, never dreaming that their long age was drawing at last to its close, that the sea which had cradled them so gently for so long was about to rise and take back everything it had given. It is a strange and quiet thing to imagine, a whole great civilization standing at the very edge of its ending and not knowing it. The last ordinary morning in Atlantis, the last ships setting out to sea, the last children playing in the gardens by the fountains, the last light of evening upon the walls of Orichalcum, all of it unknowing, poised upon the edge of a silence that was about to fall and never lift. Hold that gently as you rest. How precious and how fragile the ordinary days can be. And then the old account tells us, in a time of great earthquakes and floods, there came one terrible day and a single dreadful night. And in the space of that one day and that one night, everything changed forever. Let us move now, slowly and without fear, for we watch it only from a great and peaceful distance, into the last hours of Atlantis, and the great sinking that took it down at last beneath the waves. It began, they say, with the earth itself. A trembling, deep and low, rising up from far beneath the island, felt first as a faint unease, and then as a slow and growing shudder that ran through the ground, through the walls, through the great bridges and the shining temples. The waters in the rings and the canals shivered and rippled without any wind. The tall statues swayed. And a great and ancient stillness, the stillness that comes before all vast changes, seemed to settle for a moment over the whole of the doomed and glittering city. And then the earthquakes came in earnest. The ground heaved and cracked. The great walls of bronze and tin and orichalcum, which had stood for so many ages, began to tremble and to fall. The bridges buckled over the rings of water. The palaces, built up so lovingly by king after king, groaned and split and came apart. And through it all rose a sound greater than any the island had ever known. The deep roar of the earth in torment, and beneath it, growing, the vaster sound of the sea beginning to rise. For the ocean, which had cradled Atlantis so gently for so long, now rose up against it. The waters drew back from the shores, far out, farther than anyone had ever seen, bearing the sea floor to the trembling sky. And then they returned, not as a tide, but as a wall, a great and towering surge of dark water, rolling in from the deep, gathering height as it came, and falling at last upon the island with a weight that nothing made by mortal hands could ever hope to withstand. The great wave broke over the outer walls and swept inward, ring by ring, filling the canals, drowning the harbors, carrying away the ships like leaves upon a flood. It rolled across the racecourses and the gardens, over the barracks and the markets and the quiet, shaded walks. It climbed the rings of land, one after another, toward the shining heart of the city. And still the earth shook, and still the walls fell, and still the water rose, higher and higher, over everything that the Atlanteans had built and loved across their long and golden age. We watch this, remember, only from a great and gentle distance, as one watches a storm far out at sea from a warm and quiet room. There is nothing to fear in it now, for it happened, if it happened at all, in a time almost beyond imagining, long, long ago. We are only witnessing, softly, the turning of a very old story, the moment when the sea took back the island it had made, and the greatest city of the ancient world went down, at last, into the deep. And so the old account tells us, in the space of a single dreadful day and one terrible night, the whole island of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea. Not a part of it, but all of it. The central island with its silver and golden temple, the rings of land and water, the great plain with its canals, the mountains, the harbors, the walls of shining metal, the palaces, the gardens, the fountains, everything. All of it sank down together beneath the rising waters, and the ocean closed over the whole of it, and it was gone. Try to imagine the vastness of that silence in the hours after, where there had been a great and glittering civilization, full of the sound of trade and music and running water. There was now only the wide and empty sea, rolling gently under the stars, as though nothing had ever stood there at all. The waves that had broken so violently grew calm again. The waters that had risen in fury settled and smoothed. And by the next morning, perhaps, the ocean lay quiet and shining in the dawn light, keeping its terrible secret, as it has kept it ever since. The old account adds one strange and haunting detail. For a long time afterward, it says, the sea in that place was impassable to ships and could not be sailed across because of the great shoal of mud that lay just beneath the surface, all that remained of the sunken island, settling slowly in the deep. And so even the sea itself seemed to close the way, to draw a veil over the place where Atlantis had been, as if to say that this chapter of the world was ended and sealed, and not to be reopened. Nor was Atlantis the only one to fall on that dreadful day. For the same great catastrophe the old story tells struck the noble early Athens as well. In those same earthquakes and floods, the brave Athenian warriors who had stood alone against the empire and freed the enslaved peoples were themselves swallowed by the opening earth, and their city was laid low. And so the two great powers of that age, the empire and the city that had defeated it, passed away together in a single night, and the memory of both was very nearly lost to the world forever. Very nearly, but not quite. For in one place the memory was kept, in the ancient temples of Egypt, whose priests preserved the records of the deep past across thousands of years, writing down the great events of the world and guarding them through the long ages. And it was there in Egypt that the story of Atlantis was kept alive, long after the island itself had vanished, and long after the rest of the world had forgotten that it had ever been. And so, ages later, the account tells us, a wise Greek traveler named Solon came to Egypt and spoke with the old priests there, and they told him of Atlantis, of its rise and its fall, chiding him gently that the Greeks had forgotten their own ancient and glorious past. Solon carried the tale home with him, meaning to make of it a great poem, though he never finished it. And the story was passed down within his family from one generation to the next, spoken aloud, remembered, until at last it came to Plato, who wrote it down, and so gave it to us, and to all the ages that would follow. And from that day to this, the story of Atlantis has never left the imagination of the world. For more than 2,000 years, people have wondered about it and searched for it and dreamed of it. Was it real? Did such a place truly stand upon the earth and truly sink beneath the sea? Or was it always a fable, a beautiful invention made by a philosopher to teach a lesson about pride and virtue and the fragility of great things? No one has ever been able to say for certain, and perhaps no one ever will. Over the long centuries, many have gone searching for the lost island. Sailors have scanned the horizon for it. Scholars have pored over the old texts, weighing every word. Dreamers and adventurers have sought it in every corner of the world, in the deep Atlantic, from which it takes its name, in the Mediterranean, in the far north and the far south, beneath every sea and behind every legend. Whole libraries have been written about it, and still it has never been found, this city that may never have existed, and yet has never truly gone away. Some who study the past have wondered, gently, whether the legend might hold deep within it a distant memory of something real. They point to a great volcanic island in the Mediterranean called Thera or Santorini, which long ago, in the age of a brilliant seafaring people, was torn apart by an enormous eruption, its center collapsing into the sea, its harbors and towns drowned by great waves. Perhaps, they say, the faint memory of that true catastrophe carried down the ages, and became, in time, one of the seeds of the tale of Atlantis. But no one can be sure, and the mystery remains. The search for Atlantis has taken many forms across the long centuries, and each age has sought it in its own way. In the ages of the great explorers, when ships first crossed the wide Atlantic and found unknown lands beyond, some wondered whether these new continents might themselves be the remnants of Atlantis, or the lands the old account had spoken of, beyond the sunken island. The discovery of a whole new world, across the very ocean that bore the island's name, seemed to breathe new life into the ancient tale and set imaginations alight once more. In the centuries that followed, scholars and dreamers proposed one location after another for the lost island. Some placed it in the deep Atlantic, where legend had always set it. Some sought it in the Mediterranean, near the volcanic islands of the Greek seas. Some looked to the far north, or to distant oceans, or to lands now covered by ice or sand. Great and learned books were written, each arguing its own case, each certain it had found the answer. And yet, for all the searching, the island itself was never found, and each new theory, in time, gave way to the next. And slowly, Atlantis passed beyond the reach of scholars alone, and became something that belonged to everyone. A symbol, a dream, a name that could stir the heart of anyone who heard it. It appeared in poems and stories, in paintings and songs, in the imaginings of children and the visions of philosophers. The lost city became a kind of vessel, into which each age and each person could pour their own longing, for a golden age that had slipped away, for a perfection glimpsed and lost, for something beautiful that had sunk beneath the waves of time. For that, perhaps, is the true secret of why the story has never died. It is not, in the end, only a tale about a distant island. It is a tale about something we all carry within us, the memory, half real and half dreamed, of a golden time, the sense that something precious has been lost and lies now beneath the surface, out of reach, and the deep and quiet knowledge that all bright and beautiful things, however great, are held only for a while, before the patient sea of time draws them gently back down into itself. Every civilization that has ever risen has feared, somewhere in its heart, that it too might one day become an Atlantis, that its great cities and its proud achievements might, in the fullness of time, sink beneath the waves and be forgotten. And every person, too, knows something of this feeling, the passing of a golden season of life, the fading of a time that once seemed it would last forever. In this way, the lost city belongs to all of us, and its story is quietly our own. And yet there is comfort in it, as well as sorrow, if we look at it gently. For the story of Atlantis does not tell us that beauty is worthless because it fades. It tells us, rather, how precious beauty is, precisely because it does not last. How worthy of love and of care and of gratitude are the bright things we are given for the little while that we are given them. The Atlanteans forgot this in the end and grasped too tightly and lost everything. But we, hearing their story, may learn to hold our own golden days more gently and more thankfully. There is a lesson, too, in the manner of their fall that has never stopped feeling true. For Atlantis was not destroyed by any enemy stronger than itself, nor by any misfortune it could not have prevented. It fell because it forgot what had made it great, because it let go of wisdom and reached instead for power, because it came to love the outward show of things more than the quiet virtues that had raised it up. And that is a fall that any people and any person in any age might suffer if they are not watchful. The old story holds the warning up to us still, gently, across the thousands of years. So whether Atlantis was a memory of something real, dressed in legend and grown grander with each retelling, or whether it was always and only a beautiful invention made to teach us about ourselves, it hardly matters now. It has become far larger than the question of its own existence. It has become one of the great and permanent dreams of humankind, as real in its way as anything written in stone. The shining city that rose from the sea and forgot itself and sank and sleeps now forever in the deep. And in truth, perhaps it does not finally matter whether Atlantis ever stood upon the earth, for its deepest power was never in its stones, but in its meaning. Atlantis is the great and beautiful thing that rises and shines and believes itself eternal, and then, through its own slow forgetting of what truly matters, falls and passes away and is swallowed by time. It is every empire that has ever risen and fallen. It is, in some quiet way, every life. And that, perhaps, is why we can never quite let it go. For the sea in the old story is not only the sea, it is also time itself, patient and vast, which rises in the end over all things, however bright, however proud, however beloved. The walls of Orichalcum could not hold it back. Neither the 1,200 ships, nor the golden temple, nor the blood of the god. In the end, the gentle, patient waters closed over all of it and smoothed themselves and shone again in the morning light, exactly as if it had never been. And there is, strangely, a deep peace in that thought, if we let ourselves rest in it. For everything that has ever risen must, in time, return to the quiet from which it came, as every wave that lifts itself from the sea must, in time, sink gently back into it. There is no sorrow in this. When we see it clearly, only the great and calm rhythm of all things, the rising and the falling, the shining and the fading, the building and the letting go. Atlantis rose and shone and fell and returned to the sea. and the sea remains patient and deep, holding all that has ever been within its dark and gentle keeping. And so, somewhere far beneath the waves, the old story lets us imagine the great city still rests in the deep and silent dark. The rings of land and water, settled now beneath fathoms of quiet sea. The fallen walls of Orichalcum, their fire long since gone dim. The golden Temple of Poseidon, resting in the cold and lightless deep, where no sun has reached it for uncounted ages. All of it sleeping in the vast and patient silence at the bottom of the sea, undisturbed, at peace, forgotten by the world above. Picture it now, gently, as you drift towards sleep. The ruined and beautiful city, far below the waves, wrapped in the deep blue quiet of the ocean floor. The slow drift of the currents through its fallen halls, the soft and endless dark, the great stillness, deeper than any silence on the surface of the world. There is no fear there, and no sorrow, only rest. The long, deep, dreamless rest of a city that has laid down its burdens at last and given itself over to the keeping of the sea. And far above, on the surface, the ocean rolls on as it always has, under the sun by day and the stars by night, gentle and vast and patient, keeping its ancient secret. The waves rise and fall in the slow and endless rhythm that has soothed every living thing since the beginning of the world. And somewhere beneath them lies the memory of Atlantis, the great city that rose too high and forgot itself, and sank and sleeps now quietly forever in the deep. So let this old and gentle story settle over you now, like the calm sea settling after a storm. There is nothing more you need to remember tonight, and nowhere else you need to be. The city has risen and shone and fallen and gone down at last into a deep and peaceful rest, all while you have lain here, safe and warm and still. And you may let yourself follow it, gently, down and down, into that same soft and dreamless quiet, carried by the slow rhythm of the waves. Let your breathing settle now, slow and soft, and even like the rise and fall of a calm and distant sea. Let go of the day behind you and the day ahead. There is nothing to hold and nothing to fear, only the gentle darkness and the quiet and the deep. Drift now like the old lost city, down into the calm below all thought, where everything is still and everything is well. Sleep now. The sea is keeping watch as it always has, and as it always will, and it will hold you gently, safe and quiet, until the morning comes.